Hi, this is Alex Hardkey. I'm going to show you what goes into making some of your favorite mobile apps. So let's go over what I'll be covering in this video. First, I'll talk about the mobile device market and how to choose the right platform for your app. Then I'll talk a little bit about the different programming languages that you'll need to speak in order to create some of these apps. We'll dive into the full process of making an app from start to finish, and at the end of this video I'll leave you with some tools to begin creating your own app if you're interested. So let's start by talking about our audience. According to Library Technology Reports and ComScore, in 2011 there were about 82 million smartphone users in the US. About 30% were iOS users, about 40% were Android users, and people using other operating systems like Windows and BlackBerry made up the remaining 10% of the users. Then, as of May 2015, we see the huge jump in smartphone users in the US in just that 4-year span. Users more than doubled in that time, coming in around about 190 million people. And again, we can see that Android and iOS make up the overwhelming majority of the operating systems. So we'll just focus our attention on those two operating systems for now. Mobile devices that run the Android operating system are written in a coding language called Java. You write the actual code in a computer program called Android Studio, which I'll talk about more in a second. Android Studio can be used on any type of computer, whether it's running Windows or Mac or whatever. And lastly, it's free to use. Mobile devices that run the iOS operating system are written in Objective-C or Swift. You write this code in a computer program called Xcode, which unfortunately only runs on Mac computers. It's free to use, but you do need a paid membership to distribute your app to the App Store. So there are a few drawbacks to making iOS apps. But let's talk a little bit more about these programs that you need to make these apps. These programs are referred to as ADEs, or Application Development Environments. And as you can see, they look very similar to one another, and they do serve the same purpose. But with Android Studio, you'll be writing your code in Java, and in Xcode you'll be using Objective-C or Swift. And I'll show you where to get these programs later on. So now we can finally talk about the process of making an app. We'll talk about these more in depth, but the process follows this general flow, going from an idea to a prototype to the logic to coding, and then to the finished product. And so the first part of that process is having an idea. And when you do get an idea for an app, it helps to fit it into a genre first. Just ask yourself if it's a game or a travel app or a weather app or whatever, and then you need to find out if it's one of a kind. You should do some research and see if there are some similar apps out there already. If it's entirely unique, that's great, but if it isn't, you need to find out what's different about your app that's going to make it better than the other similar apps that are already out there. And then when you have a good idea that passes that test, you can start building a prototype for your app. And this is basically just the process of putting your idea on paper, or more likely onto a prototyping program. But this is where you just flesh out your workflow for your app and the overall design for your app. And this will be kind of used as your template for when you do start coding, so it's important that you think of everything ahead of time. So then once you've done that, you're ready to start setting up some logic for your app. And it really depends on what kind of app you're making, but this is where you kind of think about the inner workings of your app. So if you're building a weather app, for example, you're going to need to decide where you're going to get your weather data from and how you're going to load it. And you also need to think about things like user interactions and the user experience too, which includes things like navigation and notifications. And now you can just translate all that work into your coding language, which is really all this is. And so you're just going to constantly test your app for errors and bugs and kind of repeat that process until it's ready for deployment. So these last two steps are kind of a cycle that you'll go back and forth with. So that's just a very general rundown of how these apps are made. But I'm going to leave you with some of these tools so you can go try this stuff out for yourself if you'd like. You can learn the languages as you go and build some cool apps along the way. And I'll thank these sources for the information I use in this video, and I'll thank you for watching.